We have a systemic problem of vulnerable development. People think that something we built to code is going to survive. The codes are set at levels just to get us out, not to save the building, not to save the community or city.
Aris Papadopoulos, a 9/11 World Trade Center survivor whose experience reshaped his life's mission, founded Resilience Action Fund to help consumers and communities build smarter and safer.
We have so many decades of development, and a lot of it is vulnerable. And unfortunately, we've been conditioned to prioritize cosmetic above things that will make our house survive or be stronger.
So what can we do to help ourselves?
Two things there. You need to know all these details, we know about them. And I tell people prioritize those things before you spend money on cosmetics.
Aris, it's so good to have you here. I've been so excited about this interview.
Thank you, Hilary, for inviting me, and that was quite an introduction. I really loved it. Thank you.
Well, I have to tell you, when we talked and you were sharing your journey and you were sharing first, it kind of started with like, the passion. And I read before we had the last call more about you and we really started getting in. It was right around the time where the Palisades fire had just occurred. And I grew up in Los Angeles. Lots of friends, lived in the Palisades, and I know the area very well. And you hit a nerve, and it was the nerve about the why such massive destruction, and what could we do about it in the future? And we're going to get to what you're doing in the world now. But I always like to kind of set this up with a foundational basis around you and your most significant relaunch, which heart-wrenching, tears flowing. It was just, it brought me back to that day in September 2001. And so please take us back through your relaunch journey and that time period.
Yeah, thank you for giving me that opportunity. It's truly an inflection point in my life, and obviously in many lives. I'm an engineer by training. I spent, I'm an A-type individual, hardworking, workaholic, perhaps you would call it. I started in the energy right after graduating at 21, and then got into construction a few years after that. And spent a whole career in construction. And I happened to be in New York on that day because we have a terminal facility where we bring in construction materials into Newark, the port of Newark, and that's owned by the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey. And the Port Authority are the owners of the land where the World Trade Center used to sit. And actually their headquarters were in the North Tower. And we're supposed to meet with them that morning of 9/11 on the 65th floor of the North Tower at 9 a.m. in the morning. And I stayed at the hotel that was located between the two towers. It was a Marriott hotel, being so convenient. And one of our managers from New Jersey, the local manager, drove in that morning and met me at the hotel. And we were just having coffee there in the lounge, the concierge lounge, which was on the 20th floor. And my room was on the 22nd. There was a athletic facility on the 23rd. It was the top floor. And I'm a tea drinker. He's a coffee drinker, and I know how much he enjoyed his coffee. So, I would like to go early, to meetings. And I, at some point, said, let's start going. And I know we had to go down, go through security at the North Tower and up the elevators and so forth. But he hadn't finished his coffee, so he told me, I want to finish my coffee. And I know how much he enjoyed coffee, so I said, "That's fine. Go ahead."
I mean, this is one of those sliding glass moments, right?
Yeah.
Had he said, "Okay, put the cup of coffee down," I may not be talking to you right now.
Exactly. Yeah. So like within 5 minutes of that, we heard an explosion.
So you were still sitting there while he was drinking
we
his
were
coffee.
about to get up, and head out. He had just finished his coffee. So we heard this explosion, and we could not see the towers from where we were sitting, but we could see the reflection of the west side of the North Tower on the building toward the Hudson right across the street, and there was a big black circle. And the image in my mind was a bomb, a big black circle. I mean, translated in my head as a bomb. And we saw on the back windows as we got into the hallway just a rain of paper coming down. We didn't know, just papers from I guess the offices, were raining down.
Mm.
And so we rushed to the stairwell, and my room was just a couple floors above. And I said, let me go upstairs. I want to get my passport and my tickets because I was flying right after that, and I was planning to come back to the hotel. But I said, let me get those. So he said, fine, I'll wait. And I went to my room, just took whatever was on the desk in my briefcase, left everything else there, and we went down the stairwell. And they stopped us at the third floor. They wouldn't let us further down. They made us go to the south end of the hallway and get out from there. And that's when we got out and we saw that the tower was burning. We could not see the big openings yet because they were on the north and east side. We were looking west to south. But I had worked in offshore oil platforms before that, and I was always trained, to get away from scenes, as quickly as possible. So a lot of people were around looking up, and I told them, let's go as far as we can toward and headed toward the river, and that's where we saw the second plane coming. And
I mean, what a smart decision.
yeah, we didn't
Because
know what was going on. Yeah.
so many of those people that were just standing on the street
Yeah,
watching
just
ended up.
watching. Yeah, saw the second plane. I thought I didn't realize the plane was going to hit because I thought it was a plane coming from Newark Airport, trying to get a view because there were helicopters already in the air. But it kept going, and then it hit the South Tower, and everybody was kind of terrorized by that.
You watched it. You actually watched it hit and
Watched
go
it.
in
Yeah,
into the building.
and then we realized this is not some kind of event. This is something bigger than that. And people started moving away, and I started going south. And at some point, I thought he was behind me, my colleague, and I couldn't see him. And I stopped and looked for him, but I kept going to the south end near Battery Park, and I stopped there. I tried to call him. The cells were all blocked and stuff, and there I witnessed. As I was waiting to see if he was in the crowd, I witnessed the collapse of the South Tower, and I was downwind, so that ash and all the debris and stuff. Fortunately, I wasn't that close, but the ash and stuff covered me, and I could hardly breathe. I pulled my shirt up. I thought I'd jump in the river and swim. Fortunately, I found the back door of a restaurant and rushed in and washed myself. And the water turned brown a minute after that because the pipes had apparently broken.
Right.
And so, I stayed there, still not able to communicate well. And then we heard the noise of the North Tower collapsing. We were in the restaurant kitchen, and then people got in. The police got in and said, get on the boats. After that had cleared, and I got on.
When you heard the noise, Aris, did you know what was happening?
I could imagine it. I mean, it was like a freight train, running, right by you. It was a thunder and an earthquake all in one.
Mm.
So I knew that that building was coming down because I'd seen the South Tower collapsing in front of my eyes. Even if it was.
Well, you also said you saw the most horrific
Yeah.
sights that anyone could ever see.
And as I was
And
crossing the Hudson River, I could see, where there were two towers, there were just smoke, smoke and dust, and I crossed over. And fortunately, I was able to communicate with my colleague. He went in the opposite direction because his car was parked in that direction, and he went to a restroom of a bar. And then when he tried to get out of that bar, he saw it was all, dust and smoke, and he stayed in there for his good luck. And we met in Newark, and from there, I found a car in Central Jersey and drove to our headquarters, which was in Norfolk, Virginia, that night. Being in construction, the next day I gathered the people in our head office there and told them, look, this is what happened to us. Thank God, we've been saved. This is a tremendous, terrible event, and obviously we're getting more news. And I said, we need to be part of it. We're not going to change our lives. We need to be part of the rebuilding effort. and I'm gratified that today the new Freedom Tower has our material in it, and we
Mm,
also donated the material for the church that was destroyed, which was a small Greek church there, the St. Nicholas
mm, mm,
Shrine, it's now called. We donated the material for that, and I was at the church last spring for Easter, beautiful event. I was just heart taken by just being there.
mm,
Um, so that moment that I didn't know that I was breathing the dust with the shirt over my face. The thought in my mind was like, is this how it all ends? That was the
mm.
thought. I mean, I had family. I had two daughters. They at that time they were living in Greece, um, and I didn't think of anything, but just, is this how it all ends? And that
Mm,
kept that thought kept coming back into my mind
mm,
for many months afterwards, and it kind of got me to realize that I had been good in everything I'd done up till then. My schooling, a good student, a good you know a son to my parents, and good in my business and to my family and so forth. But there was some bigger purpose to my life, that the fact that I had been spared, uh, you know, and also my colleague had been spared, because every time he would go without me, and most of the meetings it was just him. He would go and have his coffee at the top of the North Tower in the coffee
oh,
house there, and nobody survived from there. But so because I was there that day, he came to the hotel, and so we both say, our fates were intertwined in that sense.
wow, they
He
certainly
saved
were.
our lives, and I saved his life.
Mm.
And when he retired a few years later, he was older than me. We gave him a coffee cup with the World Trade Center etched on it as one of his
Oh,
retirement gifts, and they gave me a copy of the cup too.
oh, look
I
at
could have
that.
my
For
tea.
those
I
that
didn't
aren't
use it for tea,
watching,
but I have it
it's
here in my
yeah.
home office.
For those, I need to just share with the people that are just watching or excuse me, just listening. It's a coffee with like etched into it, the Twin
Yeah,
Towers.
the Twin Towers.
That's really, you
Yeah.
think about it right now, 24 years ago, right?
hmm And
And
there's a book that was written by one of the survivors.
yeah,
It's called Hotel 9/11, and it has my story and many other stories of people who survived that day. It's available online, but also it's at the bookstore of the World Trade Center Museum and Memorial, if people visit there. So which I've been to many times. It's a tremendous experience to see that memorial museum.
it is
It's too much to
gorgeous.
absorb in one visit. I could
Yeah,
not
you
take
can't.
more
You
than
really
half
can't.
an
And
hour.
I'm
I went
headed
back many times. Yeah.
I'm headed back to New York for a couple months here next week. And my husband and I have put together our list and we have been and visited and I agree. You couldn't take it all in. I mean, it's incredible. So thank you for, sharing that. And what's really super interesting around this is we hear a lot about resilience, right? But after that, when you literally had to reassess, right? Is this it? Is this it? And I think that what you did was you started your next massive relaunch
Mhm.
around something that I mean you saw the buildings collapse. You literally watched one of them fall before your eyes.
Yeah.
And what was going through your mind besides the horror, as you said, of the people, you could see people jumping out, you could,
Mhm.
just the awful, but you're an engineer. You're an engineer
Yeah, and I was
and
in construction, so I started looking at the world in a different way after that day. I
mm,
started looking
mm,
at the buildings, the homes we build, the buildings we build, the cities and communities, and I asked myself, will this be destroyed by a hazard? And unfortunately, by looking at things in through that lens, I
mm,
realized that we have a systemic problem of vulnerable development. Uh, People think that something we built to code, because that's what most people hear. It's built to code, it got the occupancy
mm,
certificate, is going to survive. But unfortunately, they don't know that the codes we have set are set at levels just to get us out, just to provide us enough time to escape, not to save the house, not to save the building, not to save the community or city. So that's the level that the codes are at. And
And
people
Aris,
don't
what
realize that.
and Aris, before you continue, because we want to talk about natural hazards, so it
Yeah.
could be tornado, hurricane, fire, earthquake. What is the amount of time that the code is giving us? How much time do we really have?
Well, it depends obviously on the structure, because for single family homes,
Mm.
basically you've if that thing catches fire, or if there's if there's a tornado and you don't have a safe room, forget it. It's going to be, if a tornado hits you, it's a EF3, let's say, or so forth. If it's built in a hurricane location and it's not built to Cat 4 or 5 levels, again, you're taking a huge risk. So you better have evacuated, during the days before.
Well,
But
what's super interesting that you're saying is that we live in a fire danger area, and it's right below Chautauqua Park in Boulder, Colorado, right below Flagstaff. And what we've had happen over the last 3 years since we moved here is that our insurance companies keep dropping us.
Mhm.
And every year in the summer, lo and behold, we get the message, in 3 months you're done. And I know that in the Palisades that happened where people were left uninsured, and then you have literally no way to get, any money out of the house at that point. So when that happened, I thought, if the insurance companies are saying, house isn't going to,
Yeah.
I'm not willing to take that chance. Your house isn't going to make it.
Mhm.
And we have like a metal steel house rock. It's, it looks like it's indestructible, but it's not. Um, it gave me this sense of like, what the heck did we buy? Should they have ever built houses in that area? And in watching your first movie that you did 10 years ago, Built to Last, question mark, there was a scene in there that the house is just, gone. I mean, there's houses gone and everything. And you, you think insurance will cover it. You think you have, X amount of money of insurance, you're going to get that right back to you. And as there was a gentleman in that trailer who said, yeah, I thought I was going to get $100,000. That's what it was insured for. It doesn't happen.
Mhm.
So how can we, and I want to tie it into your what you're feeling these days with resilience, because you have a story unlike most people. Resilience has become so important to you, and yet you're seeing all these indications of, oh my god, if something happens, some disaster happens in this area, whew, you better have a tremendous amount of resilience. So what can we do to help ourselves?
Yeah, unfortunately, we're in a corner here, to some extent, because we have so many decades of development, and a lot of it is vulnerable.
Mm.
And I like to say that probably 80% of your resilience as a household, let's say, will be determined the moment you select a location, a neighborhood, let's say, and you select a house. You're pretty much 80% is set right there. Depending on the location of the place and the way it was built. The other, let's say, 15% will be what you do after you buy it. The improvements you make, the upgrades you make, and unfortunately, there we've been conditioned to prioritize cosmetic things above things that will make our house survive or be stronger. And the property industry, the Better Home and Garden TV, and other kind of popular media, have steered us in that direction to say, okay, put your money into the bathroom, into the kitchen, into the closet, into the countertop, and not really talking about, fire strengthen the outside of your house or your
I
roof.
would say it's not even not really talking about, we don't. We
Yeah,
go into we
we
go
don't.
into a neighborhood, we look at a house
Mhm.
and we're like, oh, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's got the white, picket fence. What was that movie, that was a Father of the Bride? I mean, it's like, wow, that's what we're going for. You're not sitting there saying, does it have a
Mhm.
fireproof, sealant on the outside? Does it have, enough stone? Does it have a metal roof?
Mhm.
You're not saying that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, we've been educated to
Mhm.
focus on cosmetics. The property industry, even our local governments, don't say much. In fact, local governments, unfortunately, are kind of compromised by the development and building industry because for them, property values and development is their revenue, is their paycheck. So to
Mhm.
speak, and so they don't want to rock the boat. So really, the consumer is in the dark. It's buyer beware. If you know someone like me who's talked to you or whatever or read something, maybe you'll pay some attention. But for most people, they'll just be surprised. The
They
event
will.
will
So I got to
come.
ask you, this is the most important, question I'm going to ask is what mistakes are consumers making when they're selecting a house or they're about to do an upgrade, and what should they be doing? What are some tangible tips that we should be like, ooh, and then afterwards I'm going to hit you with, just so you know it's coming, what if we're already in a house?
Yeah, yeah,
We're not planning to sell right now, the
yeah.
market's terrible.
Mhm.
What do we do?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, the biggest decision is when you're buying.
Hmm.
And definitely, two things there. You need to know your flood risk. And unfortunately, the government does a terrible job, communicating that. So I'm turning, and I'm glad to see that they're on some of the property websites like Zillow and Redfin,
Yeah.
to the flood factor. If you scroll down the listings, go near the bottom, you'll find a number for flood, and it goes from 1 to 10. And I basically tell people if it's 4 or below, it's good. If it's 5 or 6, it's kind of a yellow light, and if it's above 6, it's a red light. I would not touch that property, unless they've spent a lot of money trying to do something. So I mean that would be one of the first checks I would make, looking at neighborhoods, even before I pick a neighborhood. I've seen entire neighborhoods kind of and unfortunately, there are neighborhood ratings that exist, that rate the schools and the
Mhm,
recreational
mhm,
facilities and this and
mhm.
that, and they ignore totally the disaster risk. So some of these very risky neighborhoods rate very high in those popular ratings, and people go by those, and unfortunately, they find out they bought a lemon.
Okay, but I got to ask you. So going back to the Palisades fire,
Yeah.
uh, I mean, what made that area so risky to live in?
Yeah, obviously, the wildland portion that's right above it and surrounding it on the hill is a
Mhm.
hazard. And especially when it dries up and there's winds, and that will come from time to time. You can't control nature. You can control what we build, but you can't control nature. So, that to me is a warning sign. When I visit, and my family's from Europe originally, and I visit some of those old, towns and so forth in Europe. And what I always notice is that the town is at the center. They
Mhm.
have like a barrier of maybe a couple of miles of agricultural activity around that. And then the forest starts. They never built in the forests. They were smart enough
Mm.
through the centuries to realize when you build in the forest, you're probably going to get burned at some point. So they created a zone of agricultural activity that kind of buffered them. Uh,
So again, going back to this idea that, we're in our house. I mean, I'm sitting here, I'm like, oh
yeah,
gosh, I don't even know if the flood factor is part of where I live. I know we get
yeah.
torrential rains.
There's a fire factor too in that listing that
Oh,
kind of
geez.
will also show the fire risk. So let's say you're in a house. You're in a house. You're close to wildland. These
Mhm,
houses are built closely from between. There's not much
mhm,
space between them.
mhm,
So if one
mhm.
catches fire, the next one will catch, and the third one, and it'll cascade like dominoes. Through that area. There were a few houses that survived. I've seen pictures of houses that survived, and the general characteristic of the houses that survived was, number one, they were built of non-combustible materials. You know, so you mean they had the concrete, in the structure and outside. The roofs were metal or concrete. They had a defense zone around the property next to the building that was not bushes that could catch on fire or other things. It was stones or other types of pavers or things like that couldn't catch fire. Their porches, their decks, and so forth were also, non-flammable. Even the fencing, let's say, because if a fence leads up to your house and it's combustible, it acts like a wick. It will bring the fire to your house. If your vents have, don't have screens that will resist embers, that don't burn and don't let the embers come into the attic, let's say, the fire will come into your house through the embers into the attic and start the fire there, and then the rest of it will burn down. So, all these details, we know about them. We know how to do that. Unfortunately, if you're in a house that hasn't done it, you can improve your situation. You can put siding that's better fire resistant, like cement fiber siding on the house. You can change the roof. You can change the windows and doors. You can change the vents, the screens. You can change the landscaping. So steadily, you can improve your situation. You can improve your chance of survival. If you're planning to stay there. If you're not planning to move. So there are things we can do, and I tell people prioritize those things before you spend money on cosmetics. Because those are the things that are going to, both save you, your possessions, and
So
economically
interesting.
put you ahead in the end.
So you just wrote another book, Resilienomics, or what's it called?
Resilienomics, yeah, I coined a new word
Hmm.
combining resilience and economics. So, yeah, that book basically, I want to talk about the pocketbook, the wallet, and I want to bring it down to the household level. And a lot of my
Hmm.
discussion is really how does this all affect households? Because a lot of the work that is in studies talk about the insurance industry, talk about the government, they talk about above our heads, but they really don't say, okay, what should I do as a home, as a buyer, as an owner? And I even start from young people. When and what should they be buying as their first home? I kind of start there because the industry pushes you to, yeah, you got to become a homeowner. Why rent? Why do this and that? And I say, okay, careful. I've seen,
Right. So what do you recommend as we're wrapping up here? What do you
yeah,
for those brand new homeowners or
a
even the
brand new
ones that are
homeowners.
downsizing? What should we be doing?
Okay, at the senior level, but at the early level, a couple things. One is you want to be sure you're planning to stay where you're buying for at least 5 years, hopefully 5 to 10 years before you decide to buy. And second, make sure you buy a resilient house because if you buy a vulnerable house because of the location or the construction, you're probably going to lose your money. And I've seen that happen to people. I'm doing a study. I'm putting out a paper about Tampa. I mean, people have lost. People who bought during COVID and sold after the last hurricane season in one neighborhood that's vulnerable lost on average 35%. You know,
And a
so
majority of people put most of their money
yes,
into their
to
home.
their home. It's
Mhm.
the foundation of building wealth. And if we put our money into vulnerable homes, we set ourselves back at least a decade, maybe more. But
And so young kids, because I've got only about five of them. What should I be highly recommending to them as they're going out there? Definitely looking at location, history. I
Mhm.
got that. What else?
Yeah. Again, I like to say that these days it's better to shop for a house with an insurance agent than with a real estate broker. You know, so I would say talk to the insurance people early on, even when you're looking at neighborhoods. Uh,
That is something I don't know who does that. That is such wise
uh-huh.
information
Yeah.
because I agree. We did that last and we had already put an offer and then I think we had 6 weeks to try to find insurance. We got it. But then, like I said, every year we're scrambling.
Yeah. So shop around with an insurance agent, or at least get their advice from several. And if you have an engineer friend, you know, get his advice too. Those are the two things I would, and try to obviously, if you read my book, it'll save you Resilienomics. It'll save you a lot of headaches and a lot of money probably. So I would recommend that. I believe that we should be teaching our children about resilience from primary and secondary school. We teach them about the environment. We teach them about green, about recycling, about all those good things. But we need to start teaching them about resilience. I even created on my website a illustrated education series, a cartoon series called Ask Uncle Resi. And
I
the
saw
cartoon has
that.
kind of turned me into Uncle Resi, who's helping his nephew, his young nephew, and the nephew's family is trying to move to a new house, and the nephew is kind of learning about this stuff from his uncle, and he's educating the parents, in the process. So I'm hoping the next generation will do better than us because they're going to be the future consumers and buyers and homeowners, and they definitely need to become resilient smart, as I call it.
I think you're doing something so powerful, and it's something that, I mean, I remember just growing up in the hills of LA, and we would have, the terrible windstorms, and then fires would come up, Santa Ana winds, and then the fires would come up, but not like today. Now we're seeing it just, I mean, it's not about like, is it going to happen? It's when and which neighborhood and which area, and it's happening throughout the entire world. And so, where can people not only pick up your book, but also find out more? Where are some more resources?
Yeah, my website, Building Resilient, one word, buildingresilient.com, has a lot of information. You can buy the book on the website. I haven't put it on Amazon yet. My first book, Resilience, the Ultimate Sustainability, is available on Amazon, and it also is available as an audiobook on Audible. So for people who like audiobooks, right?
That's fantastic. And then they could see the movie Built to Last with the question mark on your website as well.
Exactly. And the new movie will start showing on PBS stations around the country this summer. We're getting it kind of loaded right now to their specifications.
Tell us the name again.
The new movie is Built to Last, Buyer Beware.
I think we talked about it before. I'm not sure we actually said it on this show. So that's great. Built to Last,
Buyer
buyer
Beware.
beware.
Yeah.
So good. Well, listen, this has been a very thought provoking conversation, one that I'm sure many of us are going to immediately go to Zillow and see, hey, how are we doing? How are we doing with the fire score? How are we doing with flood score? How are we doing with all these things? But what my biggest takeaway was potentially even having someone like an engineer come to the house and say, what else could we be doing versus the cosmetics inside that we're always wanting to, right, kind of do and enhance and everything, but really looking at it from structural. How can we give ourselves a better chance?
Exactly. And prioritizing things. Let's put first things first, and then do the nice things. Once we've made our situation stronger. Thank you
Mhm.
so much, Hilary, bringing this to your audience. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Aris Papadopoulos. Thank you again. And everyone, please go look at your house, check this out, make, again, even just one small improvement. Who knows what that can do? That fence, if you have a fence leading up to your house, and it's wood and it's not treated with something, please make sure you go out and treat that fence, because as he said, it's like a tinder, it just goes up. So again, everyone, lots of great information, and our heart goes out to you, Aris, and what you have been through. But it's interesting, the relaunch led you to what you're doing now, which is educating people around the structures that they live in, that they work in. And as we saw with the trade centers, as they crashed down, and people said, how did this happen?
Mm-hmm.
And you are focusing your precious years on this and educating not just people like myself, but it's the younger generation that needs to know. So thank you again. Really appreciate this conversation, and we look forward to having you back and hearing more about kind of the next pass of what your movie, which is Built to Last, Buyer Beware, and the impact it's going to have. So thank you everyone for being here, being present, and taking the incredible advice of what we shared today. We'll see you again next week.
Thank you.